For centuries, the Renaissance has been described as a beginning, a sudden awakening, a clean break from what came before. The story is familiar. Europe steps out of darkness. Art changes. Thought expands. The world moves forward. But history rarely moves in clean breaks, and civilizations rarely change because something entirely new appears. More often, change begins when something old no longer feels complete. What if the Renaissance was not sparked by invention, but by return? Not by progress alone, but by recurrence. Not by discovery, but by memory that refused to remain silent. This inquiry does not search for a single event or explanation. It looks instead at a recurring pattern across time, moments when ancient wisdom resurfaces because meaning has begun to thin. Before the Renaissance, Europe was not disconnected from antiquity. Classical texts were not entirely lost. They were preserved, copied, and referenced. What changed was not their existence. It was their role. For long stretches, ancient ideas lived at the edges of intellectual life. They were respected, but not confronted. Repeated, but rarely tested. Belief was maintained through continuity. Meaning was stabilized through restraint. This was not an absence of thought. It was a narrowing of acceptable thought. Across civilizations, long periods of stability tend to produce this condition. When coherence feels fragile, ambiguity becomes dangerous. When belief feels threatened, restraint appears necessary. Over time, restraint becomes habit. Questions are permitted only if they return familiar answers. Ideas are tolerated only if they reinforce what is already known. The ancient world was remembered, but not engaged. Engagement changes things. The Renaissance did not begin when forgotten texts suddenly appeared. Many of them had never vanished. It began when those texts were allowed to speak again. Ancient philosophy returned not as inherited authority, but as material for comparison. Ideas were placed beside lived experience. They were allowed to remain unresolved. This shift was subtle, but it redirected thought. Across history, renewal often begins not with certainty, but with hesitation. When answers no longer quiet the questions they once resolved. The Renaissance followed a long period in which meaning had been carefully arranged. Belief was coherent. But coherence is not depth. Over time, coherence can grow thin. Experience accumulates. The world changes. But explanations remain fixed. This creates tension. Unspoken contradictions build slowly. Ideas that once explained reality no longer fully contain it. Ancient wisdom carried assumptions shaped by a different world. When those ideas resurfaced, they did not replace existing belief. They complicated it. Complication matters. Meaning deepens, not when ideas fit perfectly, but when friction appears. The Renaissance emerged from friction across time. The past returned carrying questions formed under different conditions. Those questions no longer aligned neatly with the present. That mismatch demanded reinterpretation. Across recurring cycles, civilizations reach moments when inherited meaning no longer accounts for lived complexity. At those moments, the past becomes visible again, not as instruction, as contrast. The Renaissance did not revive antiquity as it once was. It encountered antiquity through distance. Ideas returning after long silence are never neutral. They arrive altered by what happened in between. Ancient philosophy entered a world shaped by new fears and new limits. That changed how it was understood. Altered meaning introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty expands thought. Belief did not disappear during the Renaissance. It stretched. Stretching is uncomfortable. It introduces gaps, but gaps allow movement. Across time, intellectual life oscillates between compression and expansion, between periods when belief tightens and periods when it loosens. The Renaissance sits within that oscillation. It was not a rejection of the immediate past. It was a reopening of deeper memory. When memory reopens, plurality returns. Multiple interpretations reappear. not all at once, not without tension. Plurality disrupts closure. For generations, meaning had been stabilized through repetition. Repetition creates safety, but it also dulls perception. The Renaissance reintroduced difference. Ancient texts spoke about knowledge and human purpose in ways that no longer aligned cleanly with prevailing belief. That dissonance mattered more than agreement ever could. Dissonance demands attention. When ideas conflict, belief must adapt or harden. Adaptation takes time. The Renaissance unfolded slowly because adaptation always does. Artists studied ancient forms not only to imitate them, but to understand structure and proportion. Philosophers revisited classical ethics not to abandon belief, but to test its boundaries. Testing reveals limits. Limits clarify meaning. The Renaissance clarified by destabilizing. This pattern repeats. Periods of consolidation are followed by periods of reconsideration. Meaning tightens, then meaning loosens. Ancient wisdom does not disappear during tightening, it waits. Waiting preserves potential. When conditions allow, that potential reactivates. The Renaissance was such a reactivation, but the spark was not novelty, it was permission. Permission to compare, permission to question without immediate closure. Across history, renewal begins when permission expands faster than fear. The Renaissance allowed contradiction to exist without instant resolution. That tolerance reshaped intellectual life. Tolerance for ambiguity is rare, but it is essential for depth. Depth cannot survive where every question must resolve immediately. Ancient wisdom carried questions that resisted closure. They unsettled inherited belief. Unsettling does not erase meaning, it reshapes it. The Renaissance reshaped meaning by layering rather than replacing. Old beliefs remained, new interpretations accumulated around them. Layering produces complexity. Complexity resists simplicity, and simplicity is often mistaken for truth. The Renaissance challenged that assumption. It suggested that meaning could expand without dissolving entirely. Individuals were increasingly required to interpret rather than repeat. Interpretation increases responsibility. When belief is singular, responsibility remains external. When belief multiplies, responsibility turns inward. The Renaissance marked a gradual shift toward inward responsibility for meaning. Not fully, not evenly, but enough to matter. Civilizations return to ancient wisdom not because the past was better, but because it offers contrast. Contrast sharpens awareness. The Renaissance sharpened awareness by placing Europe beside another intellectual world. That comparison exposed limits. Limits invite reconsideration. The ancient world became a reference point, not a destination. Reference points orient without instructing. The Renaissance did not provide answers. It reopened questions. Questions about knowledge, about meaning, about the role of the human mind. These questions were ancient. They became urgent again because circumstances had changed. Urgency does not come from novelty. It comes from mismatch. The Renaissance was shaped by mismatch between inherited explanations and lived experience. Ancient wisdom helped articulate that mismatch. It did not resolve it. Resolution was never the point. The Renaissance expanded the range of what could be asked. Expansion unsettles, but without it, meaning stagnates. Across time, civilizations stagnate when belief becomes too complete, when nothing remains unresolved. The Renaissance disrupted completeness. It reminded Europe that its intellectual inheritance was broader than recent memory allowed. That reminder altered patterns of thought slowly. Alteration does not require total transformation. It requires movement. The Renaissance moved thought by reopening dialogue across centuries. Dialogue across time introduces humility. The past becomes something to engage, not simply inherit. This pattern returns whenever societies sense that meaning has thinned. The past becomes visible again, not because it holds answers, but because it holds alternatives. The Renaissance was one moment in this recurring cycle. What truly sparked it was not a single force, but a pattern repeating itself. A pattern in which ancient wisdom returns when societies become willing to live with uncertainty. That willingness never lasts forever. The unresolved question is not why the Renaissance happened then, but why forgetting seems necessary before remembering becomes meaningful again, and whether our own moment is quietly approaching another threshold where the past will speak again, not as instruction, but as unfinished possibility. If you found meaning here, you're welcome to explore more on Timeless Questions, where we examine history not for answers, but for understanding.